Hi, and welcome to The Lowdown with me, Nick Cohen. In 2016, a few people emerged in America, people I very much admire. I always like apostates. I think people who turn on their own tribe, know where the bodies are buried, know what the secrets are, understand how their former friends have sold out. And in 2016, when Trump arrived, there were a group of, on the whole, pretty conservative writers in America. David Frum, Bill Kristol, Charlie Sykes, Anne Applebaum, who thought they understood conservatism. They thought they knew what it was. It was free markets, free societies, liberty. And then Trump comes along and they take a look at him. They think this man's corrupt. They think this man will do anything for power. They think this man doesn't believe in any of the traditional values of conservatism, which they admired and which people who aren't conservatives can admire as well. And they took a stand and stood against him. And they turned round expecting to see millions of conservatives behind them with their back, marching as one against Trump. And they went, where the bloody hell has everyone gone? A question, ladies and gentlemen, we're asking now in Britain, as all kinds of once honourable or supposedly honourable conservative ladies and gentlemen end up supporting our Trump mini-me, Nigel Farage. And I think we can learn something by talking to the Never Trump conservatives, by learning the hard lessons they learned the hard way. And so I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by one of the first Never Trump conservatives, one of the greatest Never Trump conservatives, Charlie Sykes. Charlie, hi, welcome to The Lowdown.
Thank you for the invitation and the introduction. I'm also one of the Never Trumpers who's grown old in talking about Donald Trump, obviously.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I would still place a bet on you outlasting him, Charlie. I'll put good money
I
on
hope
that.
so.
Yeah, I hope so
Well, I
too.
certainly hope so.
Can I just say, but before we go any further, we'll get back to 2016 and your life
Mhm.
before that.
Yeah,
You were warning about Trump in 2016. You then go
yeah,
on, you set up the Bulwark, which is a brilliant
yeah.
podcast and
Mm, mm,
Substack. I know lots of people in Britain
mm.
uh, take it, listen to it, read it. Um, did you ever, however much you warned, did you ever think it would get this bad?
Well, I was actually going back and looking through the book that I wrote back in 2017 about all of this, how the right lost its mind. And quite frankly, Donald Trump is exactly who we thought he was going to be. And we kept warning and warning and warning. And I thought it would be bad, but I have to tell you, it's actually worse than we thought. In fact, we've had a lot of conversations recently that if we had predicted some of the things that are happening right now, if we had predicted them even a year ago, we would have been accused of Trump derangement syndrome. And yet here we are. And part of it is that people didn't take it seriously. They rationalized what was happening. They thought that there were, guardrails, or that he was simply joking. And I think that what's dawning on us is that he meant exactly what he said. He is exactly who we thought he was, and it's all played out. I mean, it's right there, in his pre 2016 persona. I mean, what a corrupt con man he was. The will to power, the erratic narcissism, um, and yet we've now placed him once again at the pinnacle of American political power.
Um,
So it's
um,
worse than I thought.
okay, in what particulars? It's very hard. I hugely admire you and
Mm,
your colleagues because
yeah,
I mean, every morning you just get up and you go to work, and there are the most incredible stories. Stories you must have thought you would
yeah.
never write about your own country.
Yes, absolutely. And
What?
that would be like this week.
Yeah. Every.
Yeah.
What? What is happening now to alarm you more than you even thought you would ever be alarmed?
Well, it's the collapse of all the guardrails, all of the checks and balances that we had counted on. And I've always, when I look at Donald Trump, I mean, Donald Trump is not a mystery. Donald Trump is who he is. Um, so really, beginning in 2016, what I try to do is turn the camera lens around away from Donald Trump to look at the people who are watching him and listening to him, because I think that's more remarkable. I mean, the fact that Donald Trump is Donald Trump is not news. what's happened is this rolling capitulation to Donald Trump, which, by the way, after 10 years, I still find remarkable that people look at Donald Trump and they think, yes, that's a man that I want to be a role model. Yes, that's the man that I want to run American government. So, what alarms me the most is originally I was alarmed and shocked by the capitulation, the complete capitulation of the Republican Party and the disappearance of the conservative movement. But in Trump 2.0, we're seeing the capitulation of Congress, of the courts, of civil society, by which I mean the universities, the law firms, even the media in this
Mm.
country, the corporate media, watching the business community take a knee, watching the billionaire oligarchs line up to pay tribute. So it's Trump can say, yes, you elect me and I'm going to be a corrupt fascist dictator. It's one thing. But then to watch all of these other institutions that we had thought were more solid cave in, that's what's alarming. His march to the institutions, his destruction of the independence of the Justice Department, his attempt now, this week, to co opt the most lethal military in the world for his war within, telling the generals and admirals that you're going to be part of my war in American cities. I mean, that is deeply alarming. And it's also deeply alarming to watch how far he's willing to go in his campaign of retaliation and retribution. I mean, again, he was serious, but I think many of us thought that the courts, the Justice Department that there would be grown-ups in the room. Those grown-ups are gone. That is the most alarming thing.
Yeah, well, we talked to Anne Applebaum recently, and Anne put
Hmm.
it like this. She said, if you're going to establish a dictatorship, not
Yeah,
saying America will be a dictatorship by 2030, but if
yeah,
you were going to do it, this is what you'd do.
yes, yeah,
You would corrupt the judiciary. You would co-opt the military. You would start sending paramilitary forces into Democrat cities. I mean, it is still, well, it's not incredible to you because you since 2016, you and your colleagues, because you were Republicans yourselves,
yeah,
have been charting the moral and political collapse of the Republican, the conservative
yes.
movement. When did you first become aware of that? What first got you going on that theme?
Well, let's just go back a little bit. So I was in, on conservative talk radio in Wisconsin, one of our key swing states. And we were a little bit different. I mean, I was never Trump from the moment he came down the golden escalator. And conservatives and Republicans in Wisconsin, I think, saw Trump for what he was, and they rejected him. He lost the Wisconsin primary by double digits in the spring of 2016. Okay, so as late as that, I thought the center would hold. I thought that the rational conservative Republicans would hold. All of my friends, and I had well-placed friends. I was very good friends with Reince Priebus, who was the chairman of the Republican National Committee at the time. Paul Ryan was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. These were Wisconsin conservatives. And they kept saying, don't worry, there's no way he will get the nomination. Well, he rolls through, gets the nomination, a hostile takeover of the party. And I will tell you the moment that I realized that things were really going to change. It was at the Cleveland convention, the Republican convention. He was nominated, and he gave one of his usual Trumpian speeches. And I was walking in the hallway, and one of the Republican legislators that I had known for more than 20 years came out, and this was somebody who was very, very anti-Trump, had been, and we had the same views, about him, all along. And she said to me, Charlie, wasn't that wonderful? When are you going to get on board? And that was like the first drip, drip of recognizing that as egregious as Donald Trump was, that party loyalty was so intense, that gravitational pull, that tribal pull would pull people in. Now, in the beginning, it felt transactional. A lot of people figured, okay, we'll go along with him because we'll get stuff. My friend Paul Ryan thought, you know what? I'm going to make a Faustian bargain. I'm going to get tax cuts. I'm going to get some regulatory reforms. So I'm going to look the other way. It was transactional. But as time went on, it was like the invasion of the body snatchers.
Mm.
That's Jonah Goldberg saying, one after another, they decided that they were going to buy in. And as time went more and more, to the point where, and throughout this whole process, we're going, wait, conservatives used to stand for characters. Conservatives used to stand for free trade. Conservatives used to be supportive of legal immigration. We, we had warned about the dangers of overreaching government. We were small government people, and one after another, those principles were well, they shed them, and they shed them with great ease. And I remember having a conversation with George Will right after the election, and he said something along the lines of, "It turns out that we, those of us that were had conservative beliefs, were a much smaller band of brothers than we thought. That the conservative intellectual movement was this thin crust on top of this molten lava that Donald Trump broke through and tapped into." And so it was by the middle of 2016 was a deeply disillusioning experience as I watched people that I had known for decades and who understood who Trump was, one after another, figured we have to get on board. It's a binary choice. It's either him or Hillary Clinton, or that sort of thing.
But Charlie, you said something very interesting about seeing a friend or a former friend, a fellow Republican,
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
out from hearing Trump with a face, with the rapture on her face,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
really happy. What is it when it's not transactional? When it's not just, well, we hate the libs, so we're gonna have to vote for this guy even though we don't like him. But when it is that rapture, what is it they've bought? What ideas have they signed up for?
Well, over the years, I think that, well, a lot of it is owning the libs. I mean, a huge amount of right-wing politics in the United States, and I think there's a real distinction between American conservative politics and right-wing politics. And on the right, simply opposing the left and opposing liberals is a very powerful, in and of itself. That's Here's somebody who's going to punch them in the face. Here's somebody who hates the people that I hate. Here's the people who's going to inflict a pain on all of them. Here's somebody who gives me permission to say things and do things that I would never have been able to do in the before times. And quite frankly, right now, there's a kind of a will to power
Yeah.
that's been tapped into. Now, again, I think people are complicated. I think people can go different ways. I think if you appeal to the better angels of their nature, they can go in a different direction. But right now, he's appealing to, I mean, there's a certain romance to fascism. Let's be honest about it. The the kind of dominant sense that we are all powerful and we will destroy our enemies and we can bring back some mythical glory. I think that Americans sort of forgot that fascism actually was a thing and it was attractive to a lot of people, and some of the great civilizations of our time have actually succumbed to it. And so there is that appeal. And I will tell you, I never imagined that I would see this come to our shores, or that people that I thought that I knew and was aligned with would find this in any way attractive. And by the way, there still is a large group of conservatives who are still conservative, who are opposed to Trump, but they are not in elective office. They're not in power. They have been exiled and excommunicated from the conservative movement, and many of them have just disappeared or fallen silent.
You said something very interesting, Charlie. You said what Trump showed, and this is a connection with fascism, and this is not being
Yeah,
hyperbolic saying that, is
no,
things you thought you could never do as a right winger. You thought, well,
yeah,
in my worst moments, I might want to do that. I might want to just send the cops out to arrest my enemies for no good reason at all. I might want to be racist. I might want to throw illegal immigrants in jail, but we can't do that because we're civilized conservatives.
right.
Then Trump comes along and he shows, yeah, you can do that, and you can still
Yeah,
win. I mean, that's a
that's
very,
right.
very dangerous lesson.
10 years ago, conservatives, we were having this conversation. Um, Conservatives would have argued that the left controls all of the institutional heights and cultural heights of American society. They control Hollywood, they control the media, they control the government, they control the universities. And there was a sense of sort of victimization and futility among conservatives who were sort of used to not having their way. And in part it was because there was a classical liberal thread that used to run through conservatism, which actually believed in liberal democracy. And along comes Trump, and he says, you know what? We can scale those cultural heights. We can take them all. I can put you in charge, and it will be this bold new world. And we're going to go back to this kind of mythical America, maybe 1950s America, where everybody was white and male and had these traditional values. He's exploited religion in a deeply, deeply cynical way. I mean, Nick, Donald Trump does not have a religious bone in his body. He knows nothing about Christianity. There's nothing about him. And yet he was able to tap into that sense of victimization. And so one of the hard things to understand is if you're an evangelical Christian, how do you look at Donald Trump and think, there's my guy? And in part it is, it's about power. It's about, he's going to fight the enemies that we have convinced ourselves are oppressing us. So there was a little bit of that. But, again, conservatism is one thing. This radical right-wing move you're seeing now is more revolutionary than anything else. It is not in any way, it is not in any way conservative.
You are listening to The Lowdown with me, Nick Cohen. I'm joined this week by Charlie Sykes, Never Trump conservative journalist from America who rebelled, as his Never Trump title suggests, rebelled against Donald Trump. And Charlie, can I ask about that rebellion? Was it,
Sure.
I mean, was it painful for you? Well, was it shocking for you? What, as it emerged that people were as you say, the body
Yeah.
snatchers were taking them. The Stepford wives were moving into town. Everyone was going over to Trump. Your friends, people you thought you knew, thought you
Yeah.
believed, and you were opposing him. Was that the hard time for you?
It was, I've described this as disillusioning and soul crushing. And quite frankly, I knew that we would be going off into exile, a relatively small island. I didn't think it was going to be as small as it turned out to be. Personally, it was not hard choice. I mean, painful because of all of the relationships that I lost. I mean, people need to understand that if you break with the tribe, it's not just you're taking a political stand. You may be giving up your entire professional circle. I mean,
Mm.
people say, "Why haven't more Republicans stood up?" Well, imagine losing your friends, losing your social connections, not just your political future. And so, I had a pretty good life. I had people that I knew and trusted. I remember we, used to have these big giant banquets. We called them the Right Women Awards, and we would have hundreds of people there. I don't think that I'm really kind of on anybody's Christmas card list anymore at all. But I've always been a contrarian. See, I'm an only child. So maybe it was a little bit easier for me. But I will tell you that as painful as it turned out to be to lose all of that and to watch all of that and how disillusioning it wasn't a hard choice for me. There was never any moment where I had any doubt, like, am I going to get on board the Trump train? Like, hell no. I mean, look, how do you not see who this man is? I mean,
Mm.
that's the most painful thing is like, I'm looking at him, I'm listening to him. How do you not see this? So he actually called into my radio show in March of 2016. He called my show. He was on my show. And he was actually a pretty good sport about it. And I said to him at some point, I said, do you know that I'm never Trump? And he said, no. And it created a stir. But the fact is that I had been never Trump consistently all along. I actually was never Trump way before he came down the golden escalator. And I, as we mentioned before, totally assumed that other principled conservatives, the kind of people that had nominated, the Bushes, McCain, Mitt Romney, my friend Paul Ryan as vice president, that they were never going to be taken in by Donald Trump. So that was painful. My personal choice, it was never a choice. It was never a choice at all.
Well, I mean, funny thing, this is just a journalist to journalist thing, Charlie.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I imagine you getting up in the morning and you're never short of something to write about. Yeah, in terms of, I'm a journalist. I write, I broadcast. It's not a problem for you in America. It's not like journalists in Britain sometimes just sit here and think, oh bloody hell, what are we going to do today? There is so much to attack, and yeah, I mean, I do wonder though about what happens to your friends. Look, here's a way of putting it, Charlie. All those people you know in Wisconsin and the conservative
yeah.
movement across America who've let the body snatchers take them.
Yeah.
Suppose Trump has one hamburger too many tonight, drops
Hmm.
dead. What is
Hmm.
what is left of the Republican Party? Will it still be that type of party? Has he just changed it forever?
Well, that is actually the most interesting question in American politics. Well, there's a lot of interesting questions, but that's one. What does post-Trump America look like? What does a post-Trump Republican Party look like? Look, the Republican Party has been changed forever. It's not going back to the way it was before. It's inconceivable that you could ever have a Mitt Romney or a Liz Cheney ever speak at a Republican convention again in their lives. But what form it takes after the cult of personality goes away, I don't know. I think that you would have a rather bitter fight. But there's no question about it that this party has been changed in its demographics. It won't snap back. And I do worry. Um, I do worry what the succession will be like. I did a podcast last night, and we were talking about the palace intrigue about the succession. I said there's going to be no palace intrigue about the succession. Donald Trump's going to sit on the golden throne, the golden toilet, I said. He's going to sit there and he's going to decide it's either going to be me or it's going to be who I say it's going to be. And he will hand choose his successor. And do not be surprised at this point if his handpicked successor is also named Trump.
What, a monarchy?
Be, yeah,
Yeah.
because quite frankly, one of the scariest, you asked me about the scariest things. One of the scariest things is that this this administration is behaving in a way as if they will never be out of power. I mean, normally in power, right? You think if I go too far, what happens when these same weapons are in the hands of the opposition? Trump is acting as if the opposition will never have the same weapons to turn against him. The corruption is so blatant. It is so
Yeah, I was
out
going to
there.
talk to you about
Yeah.
that, Charlie,
Yeah.
because that's it. I mean, it's. I think listeners in UK
Mhm.
and Europe, outside
Yeah.
America, will know about Trump's corruption. He's got this big. He's openly for sale, and he's openly soliciting bribes from, as you say, from
Yes.
all these
Openly.
great tech giants. And you come and you pay him off, and they abase
Yeah.
themselves. And Paul Krugman wrote a wonderful piece about it, about saying, look at these people.
Yeah.
They own Facebook. They're richer than any human being in history has ever been.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
you're not just rich beyond the dreams of avarice. They're rich
Yes.
beyond the human imagination, and they can't buy them a shred of independence. Still, they grovel. It's this pathetic spectacle.
Okay, so that actually has been one of the most shocking things, and I think, and it started very, very early, even before he took office, was watching that premature capitulation, watching the people with the FU money decide. I mean, look, what's the point of having FU money if you can't say FU
Yeah,
to the government? And yet and the groveling and Tim Cook from Apple, bringing in that golden apple or whatever to Donald Trump, and one after another. It has been shocking, and it's also just the prospect of this concentration of power, in this oligarchy, allied with this, fascistic government. I mean, this is something that ought to alarm every single American. And so, at a certain point, though, once you've crossed all of those red lines, once you've crossed all of those Rubicons, it becomes almost inconceivable to imagine not being in power anymore, right? Is you ride there's a reason why authoritarians don't ever want to get off the tiger they're riding, right? Because they're afraid that the tiger is going to
yeah.
eat them. I think Churchill had a great quote about all of that. And so what is also alarming is the way they're behaving. What is their game plan? You know, this is a man who already tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power. I think we have suffered, and by the way, this would be my advice to you as well. Don't suffer from a lack of imagination of what these folks are capable of doing.
Mm.
Donald Trump, January 6th actually happened. It's not theoretical that it happened. He is the first president in American history who blocked the peaceful transfer of power. What makes us think that he won't do it again in the future? Now, right now, that sounds like Trump derangement syndrome, but wherever you look, he is testing the limits of our system. And every single time, he finds a weakness, what happens? He pushes harder and he's emboldened. Did you see what happened in that meeting earlier this week when he met with the congressional Democratic leaders in the Oval Office? Okay, I wrote in my newsletter that I actually apologized, but they didn't believe it actually happened. And I've been writing about Trump for 10 years. So he brings in the most powerful Democrats in Congress for a high stakes negotiation about the government shutdown. Serious stuff in the most august possible setting. And he puts out on the presidential desk, he puts out on that desk these red hats that say Trump 2028.
Yeah.
He's trolling them.
Which is
Like,
unconstitutional. Incidentally, well, I should remind people that's unconstitutional. The U.S. Constitution says a president can
yes,
only serve 2 terms. By 2028, he's done 2 terms. Thank you, Mr. Trump, and good night. But he's saying I can run again because he wants to, because
yes,
he wants the power. And
yes,
presumably, Charlie, it's not just him. There is a
yes,
whole clique, a coterie, a claque of hangers-on who are corrupt themselves. I was reading in the American press
yeah,
about people's kids making money and everyone being on the table.
yes,
And then the question you throw up is how can they lose power? Because this is a question in every dictatorship. There can't be a peaceful transfer of power because if the dictator goes, he and his cronies, the first thing that happens is they go to prison. They get arrested. They go to prison.
yes. Okay, so there's two things, 2 points that I'd like to make here. Is first of all, I mean, there are a lot of folks who will say, "Oh, that the hats, the Trump 2028 hats were a joke." It's a joke until it's not a joke.
Yeah.
And the question that I haven't gotten a good answer on is if Donald Trump says announce, and you, by the way, this is really important to remember that under our Constitution he cannot serve another term. It is unconstitutional. It is illegal. Donald Trump may say so what? That I am, America needs me, that I alone can run America, and that we are in an emergency, right? I mean, we're in emergency or we're at war. We have to change all of that. Name me one Republican in public office today who would push back against him. Name one Republican. I've asked this. I'm going to ask you, name one Republican
Mm.
who would say, no, we're not on board with that. Maybe you would say Lisa Murkowski, but I think that explains one thing. Number two, is we're already in an extraordinarily dangerous moment. I mean, we talk about, the erosion of things, the erosion of values. Well, some of those have already eroded. Donald Trump, as the President of the United States, thanks to our U.S. Supreme Court, is immune from criminal liability. He is almost completely above the law. You might recall that the founding fathers in the United States actually drew up a constitution because we didn't want a king.
Mm.
But Donald Trump, because of that Supreme Court ruling, is basically immune. But he is also then able to tell all of his cronies, tell all of the members of, say, the ICE Brute Squad who are, out there beating up grandmas, or members of the military who he's now sending into American cities. I have your back and I have unlimited pardon power. So not only am I never going to be held legally accountable, but I will make sure that you are never held legally accountable for anything you do. Now think about that, because the entire structure of our society is that we are a nation of laws, not of men. That that the rule of law is fundamental. But right now, Donald Trump can say the law doesn't apply to me, and I can make it not apply to you. And this is not something that might happen in the future. Remember, on the very first day that he got in office, what did he do? He pardoned all of the January 6th rioters, the people who attacked the Capitol, who beat the police officers, and he pardoned them all. What makes anyone think that he will not pardon all of the ICE agents or anyone else in his inner circle who is also engaging in corruption. And this may sound alarmist, but this is actually a literal description of the moment we're in.
Right. So, Charlie, you've got two things happening simultaneously, two sides of the same coin. You've got
Yeah.
the dictator in the White House, or the proto dictator in the
Yeah.
White House, using his control of the coercive apparatus of the state to go after James Comey, to go after journalists, to go
Yeah.
after people he's decided are his enemies. On what? And twisting the law, making a nonsense of the rules.
Yes.
Law doing it at the same time as he's egging on the prosecutors, so to speak. He's saying to anyone who wants defending, anyone who breaks the law on his behalf, it's fine. You've got immunity. I can pardon you. I can do whatever I want. How is American society reacting to that?
I think American society is still reeling from it. You've heard the expression, flooding the zone. The problem is it's hard to keep up with this news cycle. You mentioned before that you always have something to write about. Well, the problem is you usually have like three or four or five things to write about every
Yeah.
day. I think that there's been a lot of shock and awe. But I also want to stress that every single thing that we're talking about here could have been easily blocked under our system of government. The courts could have blocked it. Congress could have blocked it if Congress, stood up for its power. Um, the civil society did not have to go along with it. The law firms could have said hell no. Um, I think that the reinstatement of Jimmy Kimmel last week, it may seem somewhat because it's a comedian, it's entertaining, shows that in fact you can push back, that the bully, can be punched in the nose. So at every single stage, if the checks and balances had held, if the institutions had done what they were supposed to do, he wouldn't be able to have accomplished even a fraction of what he's talking about. Now, the presidency is very, very powerful in the United States. There's a lot of things you can do, there's a lot of damage you can do. But again, if Congress, if the courts, if the media, if business, if the markets, if the oligarchy had stood up against him and say, "Yeah, no, you're the chief magistrate, you're not the king," we would be living in a different world right now.
You touched on this earlier. Why is that not happening? Is it people just hate the left so much, or people feel isolated? They can be easily picked off. Why is that not happening? You said you were a nation of laws,
Yeah.
but you're looking like a nation of men and women, not laws, and men and women who are very easy to manipulate and very easy to intimidate.
Yeah, yes, that's absolutely true. Well, I mean, why is it not happening? We could talk about the MAGA base or the Republicans, but largely the answer is, I think, simple. It's fear. They're afraid of retaliation. They're afraid of revenge. They're looking around at one another and going, "Do I want to be the one sticking out?" If there had been more collective action, if all of the media companies had said, "You know what, we're not going to cave in. We're not going to pay him money for bogus losses." If the tech bros and billionaires had said, looked around and go, "You're not gonna bend the knee, are you? I won't bend the knee. We're going to be, okay on this, right?" That would have been different. If all of our American university presidents said, "No, we're not going to cave into this guy. We're going to take him to court. We're going to win on all of these things," it would be different. If members of Congress, and again, there's a long tradition here, and I guess I'm old enough to remember when the Speaker of the House of Representatives would sit in a meeting with the President of the United States, and he would tell the president what was going to happen in Congress. If and the founding fathers counted on the people in the Senate and the House of Representatives being jealous of their own power, not
Mm.
surrendering their power. If they had done all of those things, we're not going to pass that bill. No, we're not going to authorize that. If the U.S. Supreme Court would have said, "No, I'm sorry, the president is not actually above the law. No, the president cannot ignore, congressional actions." Again, things would be very, very different. So we didn't have that collective action. A lot of it is a failure of principle. A lot of it is simply fear. There's a lot of just opportunism. People thinking, "Look, here's the deal. I can stand on principle or I can go along with it and make lots of money." And there are a
Mm.
lot of people who are making lots of money. Plus, people don't want the hassle. You don't want to be sued. You don't want to lose your federal grants. You don't want to go up against a guy who's going to be there for 4 years. So at a certain point, surrender is the smart play. And unfortunately, that seemed to dominate. And it felt like dominoes, with one institution after another going, let's not fight him. If the price of business is going in and sucking up or writing him a check for $10 million, fine, let's just do that. Let's buy ourselves some freedom. What I think a lot of folks are finding out now is paying off Donald Trump does not make you safe. Paying off Donald Trump does not buy you, any kind of immunity. ABC News paid him off on a stupid lawsuit, and what does Donald Trump do? He rubs it in their nose and says, "Well, now I'm going to go after you again." So, again,
Yeah.
this notion that if you feed the alligator will eat you last. Not as prudent as you think it is.
Yeah, well, it's Rudyard Kipling's line. Once you start paying the Dane Guild, you never get rid of the Dane. Don't just
Exactly.
don't do it. Don't do it.
Right.
You are listening. I've got to say this. I've got to put the link in. You are listening to the Lowdown with me, Nick Cohen. This week we're joined by Charlie Sykes. And Charlie, when you can I ask you? This is the criticism. It's an observation, and I
Yeah.
want
Okay.
and let's see where it goes. I listened to you on the Bulwark. I listened to Tim Miller, your
Mm.
successor. I
Yeah.
know David Frum, proud to know him, great guy.
Yeah.
Very proud to know Anne Applebaum.
Yeah. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
these people who were conservatives, very interesting as always. The people who
Yeah.
come from inside the organisation can tell you everything that's going wrong.
Yeah.
But here's an odd thing: you move over and you're opposing the Republicans.
Yeah.
But what you don't say to the Democrats is, look, listen to us. You don't have to take on board anything we're saying. But yes, we are conservatives. We're from the conservative movement. We can lay some hard truths out for you. If you let, if when Biden's in power, if you lose control of the Mexican border, if you go too far with anti-police rhetoric, if you push the trans issue too far and all this woke stuff too far, there are lots of people who really don't like Trump but will hold their nose and vote for him because they think, no, we don't want this. I've never heard any of you say that. You seem to have just said, look, we've moved over. We're going to attack Trump. We're not going to give the Democrats our advice on how we can beat this guy.
Well, I need to be louder then because I have said all of those things. And this is a very, very interesting point. I'm going to try to not get myself in trouble here, Nick. I'm not affiliated with the Bulwark anymore. I'm on my own. My newsletter is To the Contrary, and part of the
Yeah,
To the Contrary is that I think it was a major mistake for much of the Never Trump movement to basically become liberal Democrats.
yeah.
Because
Okay.
what happened is they were no longer, they were number two things. They were no longer speaking to those center right conservative swing voters. They were perceived to be simply just, parroting the other lines. And by the way, I take some responsibility. I'm a contributor for the progressive network MSNBC, and I think this is a real problem. The other problem was that during the Biden years, I think that one of the fundamental roles of the center should have been to keep the administration from going too far left on all of the issues that you were saying, on crime, on immigration, on the trans issue. And by the way, Democrats are still deeply in denial about the both the science and the politics of that issue. And so this is one of the things that I want to spend more time on because I think you are exactly right that if Never Trump becomes kind of a progressive, echo chamber, well then why should conservative voters listen to them anymore? And I think this is a real problem. I also think that look, in the United States we are so closely divided that the majority makers are in the center. The majority makers are people that we do understand and that we should be able to talk about. So one of the things that I was actually funny you should mention this because I was thinking today that in my newsletter I want to start having sort of a tough love section or a like you people are in a bubble, and here's some every day I'm gonna give you something that might break you out of your bubble. Democrats have a real problem. I think it is often elites talking to elites. There's a real hostility on the part of sort of the base to hearing critiques. I mean, the fact to this day, if you write a piece saying Democrats made a terrible, terrible mistake in not recognizing that Joe Biden was too old and too frail to run for re-election, you will get massive blowback. Like people,
Even now.
even now, and it's like, look, when you lose, whether a sporting team or a country that's lost a war, if you do not have an honest autopsy afterward and say, what did we do wrong? How did this happen to us? You're going to keep making the same mistakes over again. So I do think that part of the problem is that opposing Trump is so consuming. It's so exhausting that I do understand people saying, we don't want to hear another critique of the Democrats. But if they don't get immigration right, if they don't get crime right, if they don't get these cultural issues like trans right, um, they're going to keep losing elections. And I do think that there was a segment of Never Trump that decided that we're going to prove to our new allies that we're okay. And there were actually Never Trumpers who were arguing that, the Biden administration is not too far left, who actually mocked people who were warning that inflation was a real problem. Actually said, it's stupid for Democrats to worry about inflation or worry about crime. And I'm sorry, that was not helpful. So I think that exactly the kind of critique that you're talking about is absolutely essential. That you have to say that if you do regard these things as existential threats, then your prime directive is not to do stupid things that will cause you to lose. You can scratch your ideological id, but ultimately, if you think it's an existential threat, then maybe you should do things that are not counterproductive, that are deeply unpopular. So this is something, and I take the critique, and I know that there have been some people like, look, in fairness, Anne Applebaum wrote an absolutely fantastic piece for The Atlantic where she talked about the dangers of left-wing cancel culture at a time when a lot of people on the left were saying there's no such thing as cancel culture, there's no problem with
We
wokeness.
get all that here, yeah.
No. But yeah, but Anne Applebaum did a great job, basically saying, "Excuse me, this is a problem. You have to address it." But I think we need more of that. But I have to tell you that, in a hyper polarized environment, people want what they want. And I think this is part of what's happening as we become, divided into these alternative reality silos, that people want them to be safe spaces. They don't want to be told things that they don't want to hear. They don't want to hear Joe Biden's too old. That was a reckless thing to do. No, some of this talk about race is wrong. Biden completely botched the immigration policy. I mean, he's not as bad as Donald Trump. Donald Trump was horrible, but the problem is that Democrats lost a lot of credibility on that, and don't even get me started on the trans issue.
Okay. Well, I mean, listening to you, Charlie, it's sort of here in Britain, there is that kind of vertiginous feeling that you must have had
Yes.
in 2016 here now. Suddenly, people on the right, including people I know and used to quite like, are suddenly just going off to the extremes in the most extraordinary manner,
Yeah.
egged on, incidentally, by Elon Musk and JD Vance, who are
Yes.
interfering in the internal affairs of our country. But,
Yes.
they're suddenly saying, well, if you're white, you can't be English if you're not white. And this is just taking up everywhere. You can be British. British is multinational, but English
Yeah.
is for white people. They are cheering on women who incite violence and have gone to prison for inciting violence. It's quite extraordinary to watch.
It is.
What we've got in Nigel Farage, a Trump-like figure, who's
Yes.
our constitution. I mean, you might complain about the checks and balances of the American
Yeah.
constitution. At least you've got checks and balances. If you get the majority in the English House of Commons, British House of Commons, you can do what the hell you like.
Yeah.
Nothing can stop you. What advice would you give to people here who want to resist the Trumpification of British politics?
Well, I have to say that, watching that from over here, it does feel familiar. I do feel a little bit of PTSD flashback to watching it. And my advice is that this is the moment. Push back now. The people who are keeping their heads down because they think that it might be difficult, it's nothing. If you don't do it before they get power, it becomes much more difficult when they do get power. And I think that you ought to have the imagination to understand this could happen. So There are voices who are respected. And I think the most important voices, again, if we failed here in this country, but the most important voices are the voices that your swing voters, your actual conservative voters trust and listen to. And they need to hear from people who say, this is not who you want to be. This is not what you want Britain to be. Look, I am a conservative. I share your views on a whole host of issues. But that doesn't mean that we have to buy into a demagogic con man like Nigel Farage. So you have to have an alternative to them that shares their values. If people think that you have contempt for them or you don't share their values, they're not going to listen to you. You know, that's part of the problem is if never Trumpers go to conservatives and they basically just sound like, you sound like, Bernie Sanders, well, no, they're not going to listen to you. But if you go to them and you say, look, I share your concerns about families. I share your concerns about crime and immigration. I am not a screaming liberal, but do not go this way. And it has to be done early. I think, and this is maybe the fantasy, in our country, if in late 2015, if you had big conservative voices like Rush Limbaugh, not a fan, but if Rush Limbaugh would have told his audience, come on, people, Donald Trump's a joke. Donald Trump is not what we have fought for all these years. The best time to stop these guys is on the launch pad before they achieve velocity. Maybe too late, but it's got to be done early and it's got to be done forceful because if you don't do it now, it's going to be exponentially harder a year from now.
Yeah, well, that is very, very good advice, Charlie. I very much regret to inform you there's a couple of honourable exceptions in right-wing journalism, which I know, or in journalism, which I know. I mean, I can count them, two honourable exceptions. The right-wing journalists, right-wing newspapers, conservative politicians are not fighting Farage. They're great at fighting the left. They're great at saying, oh, you can't call him racist, or you can't do this, you can't do that. And, as you know, there's a lot to fight on the left, but it is not a very inspiring spectacle. I mean, I keep saying there are no conservative George Orwells. There are no conservatives in Britain at the moment who are standing up and saying, criticising their own side and doing what you're saying and saying, fine. I'm a conservative. I mean, small state, low taxes, controlled immigration, controlled crime. No problem with any of that. These people, we don't want them. And here's why. And I can talk, it's not happening. It's not happening here at all.
Well, having gone through this soul-crushing, disillusioning experience watching conservatives in the United States, I can't say that I'm shocked, but I'm very disappointed to hear that. And you know what? I would just think that Great Britain does not want to become Trump's America. I mean, I would think at some point you go, look, we have these alternative histories. Do you really want, our country to look like that? And unfortunately, the problem is because of the media ecosystems, it's hard to overstate how intense these alternative realities are, the images that people have, because, you and I may say, look at Donald Trump, it speaks for itself how embarrassing this is. But to these conservatives that you're talking about, what are they seeing? What are they thinking? Why are they? And, and by the way, could I just say that it felt very cringeworthy to watch Trump's quasi-state visit where he's being treated as a visiting, head of state by the king and the queen and by your prime minister. Not helpful. Not helpful at all.
Okay. All right, Charlie. Well, look, we're having very good advice. If you want to avoid soul-crushing disappointment, I want you to rewind this podcast, listen to it again, and take on every word of advice Charlie says and act on it. Charlie, thank you so much for joining us. It's been absolutely a tour de force, I have to say.
Okay, it's been a real pleasure, Nick. Anytime.
Yeah. Okay. Well, don't say that. I won't be nice and polite in English about it. I'll take you up on it. Charlie, we can read you on Substack. Can we not? It's called. Or your Substack's called.
Yes. To the contrary.
To the contrary.
And I also have a podcast called To the Contrary.
Yeah. So no room for confusion there. If you like my stuff, you can read me on Substack, Nick Cohen. writing from London. We must, as always, thank our producer, Andy Hoskin, who turns what would otherwise be a complete and utter shambles into this beautiful broadcast you've heard today. Thank you, Andy. And until next time, all it remains for me to do is to thank you for listening and say goodbye.